You know that saying, never mess with a man who has nothing to lose? Well, the Homeowners Association in my town should have listened. Because when they illegally sold my 2,000 acres of land to line their own pockets, I didn't just fight back. I turned their entire neighborhood into mine. And I didn't need violence. I used the one thing they never saw coming: the law. This is how the HOA tried to destroy my life, and how I legally sold theirs instead. I was born and raised on that land, 2,000 acres of rolling hills, tall pines, and a creek that glowed gold during sunset. My father called it growage. He used to say, "Land doesn't just belong to you, son. You belong to it." For 3 generations, our family ran cattle, grew wheat, and minded our own business. By the time my father passed, I was the only one left. No wife, no kids, just me and the land. Then the city started expanding. Developers bought up everything around me. And soon enough, an HOA, the Silver Pines Community Association, popped up right on the edge of my property line. At first, I didn't mind. I even helped them with fencing and access roads. They waved, smiled, acted like good neighbors. But that changed fast. One afternoon, I was working on my tractor when a shiny SUV pulled up. Out stepped Linda Patterson, the HOA president, perfect hair, power suit, and a smile sharper than barbed wire. She told me she wanted to discuss my unused land. Said it was an eyesore for their community. I laughed and told her it was grazing land, not a parking lot. But she kept going, talking about complaints from residents, the smell of livestock, how they had community standards. I could see through her from a mile away. She didn't care about smells, she cared about expansion. She asked if I'd ever consider selling. Said developers were interested. I told her flat out, this land isn't for sale. Not now, not ever. She smiled that fake smile again and said, "We'll be in touch." And she was. Over the next few weeks, letters started arriving. Complaints about runoff water, noise, visual pollution. They said my barn didn't fit their neighborhood's aesthetic, as if I was part of their HOA. I ignored it all. Then came a certified envelope. Inside was a legal notice claiming part of my land was being reclassified as community-managed open space. I called the county immediately. The clerk sounded confused. She said, "That's odd. According to our records, that parcel belongs to the Silver Pines Association now." My heart dropped. They transferred ownership. I drove down to the courthouse that same day with my deed, title, and survey maps. Sure enough, the county database had been updated. Nearly 80 acres of my southern pasture were now listed under Silver Pines HOA. "How's that possible?" I asked. The clerk told me it looked like a subdivision reclassification filed 3 months ago. That was about the same time Linda first came to chat. I demanded to see the paperwork. When they handed it over, I almost tore it in half. It was a forged consent form with my signature on it. The notary listed a man named Dale Patterson, Linda's husband. That night, I drove straight to their fancy clubhouse during their board meeting. The room went silent when I walked in. I told her she forged my signature and stole my land. She didn't even blink. "Please, calm down," she said. We filed everything legally. The county approved it. She slid a stack of documents across the table, fake plats, notarized pages, all neat and perfect. I pointed at the signature and said, "That's not mine." She just smiled and said, "Then you'll need to take it up with the county." We just followed procedure. Everyone in the room looked away. They all knew what was going on. That night, I sat on my porch, staring out at the fields my father left me. His words echoed in my head. You belong to the land. They hadn't just stolen property. They'd stolen part of my family's soul. But I wasn't about to let it end there. If they could use the system to steal from me, I'd use the system to take everything back and more. The next morning, I called my old friend Marcus, a real estate attorney. We'd grown up together. He looked over the documents and shook his head. "They messed up bad," he said. "Forgery, false filing, property fraud. If we play this right, they're done for." But I didn't want to go to court yet. Not immediately. I had another idea, something slower, smarter, and far more satisfying. Marcus and I started digging. We found that the HOA had used the same notary, Linda's husband, for multiple land transfers. They'd been quietly reclassifying boundaries and easements for years, stealing land from small owners like me. A few acres here, a few acres there. And the money. They'd sell those parcels to developers and pocket the kickbacks as consultation fees. So I told Marcus, let's not expose them yet. Let's buy them time to hang themselves. We created a company called Grayage Holdings LLC, anonymous, invisible. Over the next few months, we started buying properties surrounding Silver Pines, foreclosures, tax liens, tiny forgotten lots. Little by little, we surrounded the HOA's development without them even realizing. But Linda wasn't finished. When I stopped responding to her letters, she filed a nuisance claim against me. Said my livestock and tractors were disrupting community peace. They even tried to get the county to fine me $5,000 a day when I walked into that hearing. Linda smirked like she'd already won. But the county dismissed the claim, said the HOA had no jurisdiction outside its boundaries. I walked out smiling because by then, I already owned half the road leading into Silver Pines. After that, I started recording everything: calls, meetings, public statements. Every shady move they made, I documented. Then I decided to bait them. I offered to settle to sell them the rest of my land. Linda jumped at the offer. "Mr. Gray, this is great news. The community will be thrilled." I smiled. "Let's make it official. You'll get the first right to purchase." She had no idea that the contract she was about to sign, written by Marcus, had clauses that made her HOA legally liable for every fraudulent acre they'd taken. She signed without reading the fine print. A few weeks later, the walls started closing in on them. The county began auditing land records. Developers started pulling out. And one morning, sheriff showed up at the HOA clubhouse with a court order. The county had discovered multiple illegal transfers. The HOA's assets were frozen, pending investigation. Linda tried calling me. I didn't pick up because at that very moment, finalizing something far sweeter. Grayage Holdings had just acquired the foreclosed lots of Silver Pines. Legally, they stole my land. Now, I owned their homes. They thought I was just a stubborn old farmer. But I was the land. And the land always remembers who it belongs to. Asterisk. When I say I owned their homes, I don't mean it metaphorically. I mean literally. Through foreclosures, unpaid taxes, and quiet acquisitions. Grayage Holdings, my shell company, legally became the owner of multiple lots within Silver Pines. And the best part? The HOA board had no idea, while Linda Patterson was busy fighting county auditors and denying wrongdoing. I was quietly buying up everything they'd neglected land underneath their so-called community spaces. Maintenance buildings, even the roads they drove on, it turns out. Most of Silver Pines had been built on what used to be county easements, not HOA property. They'd assumed ownership through shady paperwork, the same kind they used to steal my 80 acres. The irony? They'd filed everything in the public record. All I had to do was dig. Marcus handled the legal side while I kept my name out of sight. We had a simple plan: expose their fraud at the perfect moment when I held all the leverage. But before that, something unexpected happened. Linda came to see me. She showed up at my ranch one morning, same shiny SUV, but this time her confidence was cracking. "Mr. Gray," she began, "I wanted to clear the air. There seems to be a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." That's what she called forgery and theft. You forged my signature, I said flatly. You stole land that's been in my family for generations. That's not true, she said quickly. The board filed everything in good faith. Maybe there was a clerical mix-up, Linda, I interrupted. You're knee-deep in this? Stop pretending. For the first time, she looked scared. Not because I was threatening her, but because she knew I wasn't bluffing. I told her I'd already filed a formal complaint with the county and that an investigation was underway. She tried to negotiate, said they'd make it right by returning the 80 acres. I smiled and said, "Oh, I'm way past 80 acres." She didn't understand what I meant then. But she would soon. After she left, Marcus called with news. The county had found over a dozen fraudulent deeds linked to the HOA, all notarized by her husband. Their entire board was now under review. Still, I didn't want them arrested just yet. I wanted something better, public humiliation and poetic justice, so I waited. Weeks passed. Silver Pines started to crumble. The HOA's legal fees were piling up, their funds frozen, and residents were angry. Property values were dropping. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Linda tried to keep control, but her confidence was gone. People were demanding answers, and that's when I made my move. Through Gray Ridge Holdings, I placed an open bid to purchase the HOA's remaining assets, including the clubhouse, recreation park, and maintenance lots to help with their financial restructuring. Desperate to avoid collapse, the board voted to approve the sale. They didn't even realize they'd just sold their own neighborhood to me. Marcus couldn't believe how easily it happened. They didn't even ask who the buyer was. He said, "Nope," I replied. They were too busy saving their own skins. A week later, we received confirmation. All remaining HOA assets had been transferred to Gray Ridge Holdings. I now owned their clubhouse, their playgrounds, their parking lots, even the access road leading into Silver Pines. For a man they thought was a backwoods nobody, I was now their landlord. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I wanted them to feel what it was like to lose everything. The same way they made me feel when I saw that forged deed. So I sent letters. Official notices, worded politely, signed by my company. Dear residents of Silver Pines, due to outstanding infrastructure costs and easement maintenance, property access fees will be reinstated as per revised ownership guidelines. In plain English, they now had to pay me to use their own roads. The reaction was immediate. Furious emails, phone calls, even threats. They tried to contact the county, but everything was legal and properly filed. When Linda finally called, her voice was trembling. "You can't do this," she said. "Oh, but I can," I replied. "Everything was done by the book, the same way you did it to me. This isn't justice. It's revenge. No, Linda, this is a lesson in ownership." I ended the call there soon after. I started hearing rumors that the HOA board had been dissolved. Residents were furious that their leaders had sold off community property without telling them. Lawsuits started flying. And just like that, Silver Pines began to rot from the inside. But the real knockout punch came when the county prosecutor called me. "Mr. Gray," he said, "you might want to come down to the courthouse. We've found something." When I arrived, he laid out a folder thick with evidence. Linda's husband had forged not just my documents, but over 20 others. And the HOA's treasurer had been siphoning funds into a private account. They were facing multiple felony charges. I asked the prosecutor what would happen to the properties they'd stolen and sold. He said most of them would revert to the rightful owners, but others, the ones built on questionable deeds, would likely go up for auction. That's when I smiled. Because guess who was first in line to buy them? Gray Ridge Holdings. I didn't need to lift a finger. The system they used to steal from me was now handing everything back, and then some. By the end of that month, I owned nearly half of Silver Pines. The same HOA that once tried to erase my family's legacy now paid me rent. I didn't boast about it. I didn't rub it in their faces. But one day, I drove through their manicured streets, past their tidy houses and trimmed lawns, and stopped outside the old clubhouse, now legally mine. I got out, leaned against my truck, and watched as movers took down the Silver Pines community sign. A man walked by with his dog and said, "You, the new owner?" I nodded. "Yeah," I said, "just reclaiming what's mine." He smiled awkwardly and walked off. It was a quiet victory. No fireworks, no shouting. Just the deep, satisfying peace of justice finally done right. But the story wasn't over yet. Because Linda Patterson still had one card left to play, and she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Asterisk, asterisk, after the HOA collapsed and the county pressed charges. I thought it was finally over. I'd won, legally, quietly, and completely. But I underestimated one thing. Linda Patterson. She wasn't just corrupt, she was desperate. And desperate people don't go down without one last fight. It started small. Anonymous letters showing up in my mailbox. At first, they were just insults, calling me a greedy snake, a traitor to the community. But then they turned personal. Threats. One letter even said, "You'll regret ever touching Silver Pines." Marcus told me to ignore it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. A week later, I got a call from the county zoning office. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint against me, claiming I'd built illegal structures. On county easement land, the complaint listed detailed coordinates right down to my barn and irrigation sheds. Only someone who'd studied my property for years could have written it, and there was only one person who fit that description. Linda. I drove down to the zoning office, showed them the original blueprints, deeds, and property maps. Everything checked out perfectly. The case was dismissed on the spot. But it made one thing clear. She was still trying to destroy me, Marcus said. "She's spiraling, Gray. Let her burn herself out." I wanted to believe that. But I knew Linda. She'd built her life on control. And now she was losing everything, her reputation, her house, even her husband, who was under federal investigation. And when people like that start losing control, they get dangerous. One night, I was out checking the cattle fences when I noticed headlights near the south pasture, the same land she had reclassified months ago. The truck wasn't mine, and it wasn't any of my workers. I drove closer, turned on my brights, and there she was, Linda Patterson, standing on my land with a flashlight, digging through a plastic storage bin. I stopped the truck and stepped out slowly. She froze, deer in headlights. "Linda," I said, "you're trespassing." She tried to hide the bin behind her. "I was just looking for some documents," she stammered. "Documents that don't belong to you," I replied. Her voice cracked. "You don't understand, Gray. They're coming for me. The auditors, the developers, they're blaming me for everything." "Because it was you, Linda." She clenched her jaw, tears forming in her eyes. "I built this community. I gave people a place to live. You think you're the hero, but you ruined everything." I stared at her for a long moment. Then I said quietly, "You ruined it yourself the day you thought you could steal from me." She screamed something unintelligible, threw the bin into her truck, and sped off into the night. I thought that was the last I'd see of her. But the next morning, the sheriff knocked on my door. "Mr. Gray," he said, "you might want to come with us. There's been an incident. They found Linda's SUV crashed in a ravine about 5 miles from my ranch. The vehicle was totaled. The sheriff said she'd been speeding down the back road, lost control, and hit a tree. Inside the wreck were burned documents, HOA files, forged deeds, and a flash drive. I didn't say anything. Just stood there, staring at the smoking remains of everything she'd tried to protect. The sheriff sighed. "You've had a rough year, Gray, but it looks like it's over now." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. Marcus later confirmed that the flash drive contained years of internal Wowsalai correspondence, proof of how Linda, her husband, and the treasurer orchestrated every fraudulent sale. The evidence was enough to close every investigation. Asterisk. It was officially over. But even with all that closure, I didn't feel happy. Just empty. A few months passed. Silver Pines was quiet again. The homes that once sparkled with luxury now sat half empty, overgrown, and silent. The HOA sign was gone. The clubhouse now stood abandoned, just another building on my growing list of holdings. One evening, as the sun set over the ridge, I drove past the old entrance. The air was still. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I just felt sorry for her. Linda wasn't evil at her core, just consumed by greed and pride. She thought power made her untouchable. But power built on lies always collapses eventually. I parked near the empty clubhouse, got out, and walked around the property. The echo of laughter still lingered. Kids, families, barbecues. It had once been a symbol of community. Now it was mine, but strangely. It felt like a monument to everything she destroyed. Marcus called that night. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just thinking, you did what you had to do." "I know, but it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like balance." He chuckled. "That's what real justice feels like, my friend." I hung up, walked to the porch, and looked out at the stars. For the first time in a long time, the land felt quiet again, peaceful, almost like it forgave me for the chaos that had swept through it. I whispered to the wind, "We're even now, old man," 'cause I knew somewhere. My father was still watching over Grey Ridge, proud that I didn't let anyone take it away. I thought that was the end of it. But then came the letter. No return address. Just a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. "You may own the land, but you'll never own Silver Pines." I stood there, holding that letter under the porch light, heart pounding. The paper smelled faintly of smoke, the same kind that came from Linda's wrecked SUV. Marcus told me it was probably some leftover resident trying to stir trouble. But something in me knew. Linda Patterson wasn't finished. Asterisk, asterisk, I stared at that letter for a long time. The handwriting was unsteady, almost like it had been written by someone injured or in a hurry. The words themselves didn't scare me. But the timing did. It had been 2 months since Linda's crash. 2 months since her supposed death. But something about it didn't add up. The sheriff said the body was burned beyond recognition and DNA testing was still pending. Back then, I didn't question it. I just wanted closure. Now, looking at that letter, I wasn't so sure anymore. A few days later, strange things started happening around the ranch. Tools went missing. Security cameras went offline at random hours. Once, my foreman swore he saw a shadow moving near the old fence line at midnight, but when he went to check, no one was there. Marcus said it was just paranoia. Maybe he was right. But when I found my dog barking furiously at the tree line one night, growling at what looked like a faint reflection of light deep in the woods, I knew something was wrong. I walked out with my flashlight, sweeping through the fog. And there it was, a faint glimmer, something metallic, half buried near an old oak tree. I knelt down and brushed away the dirt. It was a phone dot, old, cracked, and waterlogged. But when I turned it over, the initials LP were scratched into the case. Linda Patterson. My stomach dropped. I took the phone to Marcus the next morning. He plugged it into a data recovery tool. After a few minutes, the screen flickered to life, barely working. What we found made my blood run cold. It was a video. Grainy, time-stamped 2 nights before her death. In the video, Linda sat inside her SUV, crying. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "They're after me," she said. "Not just Gray, not just the county. The investors. The people behind all of this. They want the land back, and they'll do anything. If something happens to me, tell them the footage cut off." Marcus rewound it. But the rest was corrupted. He looked at me seriously. "This doesn't look staged, Gray. Whoever she was talking about, they're real." That's when everything shifted. Maybe Linda wasn't the top of the food chain after all. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing patterns: shell companies, land transfers, silent partners that had bought small stakes in the HOA before it collapsed. One of them stood out: Silver Pines Holdings LLC, registered under an offshore name, Baldrick Management. I had Marcus dig deeper. What he found shocked both of us. Baldrick Management had been quietly buying up foreclosed HOA properties across 3 counties, all tied to the same group of developers Linda had once bragged about partnering with. It wasn't just my land they wanted. It was everything around it. They weren't playing neighborhood politics. They were building something bigger, maybe a private resort, maybe a luxury golf estate. And Linda? She was just their puppet, until she became a liability. That night, I drove out to the edge of Silver Pines again. The fog was heavy, wrapping around the streetlights like smoke. Half the homes were still empty, their driveways cracked, grass overgrown, and then I saw it, a single light on inside the old HOA office. I hadn't stepped foot in there since the county shut it down. The door creaked open easily. Inside, everything was dusty, except the desk. On it sat a stack of files, new ones, freshly printed. One folder had my name on it. Inside were photos, surveillance shots of me, my ranch, my truck, even Marcus's office. Dates, times, routes, everything tracked. And then I found another document that froze me in place. Acquisition proposal, Grayridge Conversion Project. The plan showed my entire property rebranded under a corporate resort name. Projected profit margins, shareholder allocations, everything. And on the final page, typed neatly at the bottom, was a familiar signature. Linda Patterson. My chest tightened. Either someone forged it, or she was still alive. I took photos of every page, stuffed the originals back in the drawer, and left. But as I reached my truck, I noticed something else. On my windshield, tucked under the wiper, was a small black envelope. No stamp, no address. Inside a note: "You were never the enemy, Gray, but you're standing in their way now. Leave Silver Pines before it's too late." There was no signature this time, but I didn't need one. The handwriting was the same as the first letter. Linda Patterson was alive. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind through the fields, felt like someone was watching. Marcus called me in the morning. "I did a trace on Baldrick Management," he said. "You're not going to like this. Try me. It's not just some random company. It's a front owned by Ryder Development Group. They're the same people Linda partnered with to build Silver Pines in the first place. But here's the kicker. They just filed for permits for a new project." I felt my stomach turn. "What kind of project?" He hesitated. "They're calling it Silver Pines 2.0. I looked out across my land, the morning fog rolling over the hills. They weren't finished, not by a long shot. And if Linda was still alive, she was either running from them or working with them again. Either way, the war for my land wasn't over. It was just beginning. Asterisk, asterisk, when Marcus told me about Silver Pines 2.0, something inside me hardened. They hadn't just stolen my land. They were trying to erase every trace of me, like I'd never existed. But there was still one piece they couldn't. Control. The truth. And if Linda Patterson was still out there, she was the key to everything. I spent the next few days going through every contact. Every old contractor who had ever worked with the original HOA. Most hung up the moment I mentioned her name. A few said she'd been seen near the coast. Others said she was dead for sure. Then Marcus found something. A small property deed under a fake name. Laura Pierce registered 6 months after her death. The address? A rundown cottage 2 counties away, near an abandoned marina. My heart pounded as we drove there that evening. The place was quiet. Fog hung low over the water, and the boards on the pier groaned with every step. Then, from inside the cottage, a light flickered. I knocked on the door. No answer. I tried again. Louder this time. A voice came from behind the door, hoarse, trembling. "Who's there?" "Linda," I said quietly. "It's Gray." There was a pause, then the sound of the lock clicking. The door opened just enough for me to see her face. Paler, thinner, scar running across her cheek. But it was her. She stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. "I told you not to come," she whispered. "You sent the letters," I said. "You warned me." Her eyes darted past me, scanning the street. "You shouldn't be here. They'll find out." "Who?" "Linda." "Who are they?" She swallowed hard, then opened the door fully. "Come in." "But you didn't hear this from me?" Inside, the cottage was a mess. Paper scattered, maps pinned to walls, red strings connecting names and properties. At the center of it all, Ryder Development Group. She sat down, her hands trembling. "They used me, Gray," she said. "I thought Silver Pines was supposed to be my big project, a community that would bring life back to that land. But Ryder had other plans." She reached for a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were documents, confidential internal memos, hidden ownership records. They planned to overvalue the properties, create fake demand, then dump everything when it failed, write it off, and keep the land through foreclosure loopholes. It was a money laundering operation. The HOA wasn't even real. It was a front from the beginning. I clenched my jaw. "And when you found out?" "They tried to silence me. The car crash wasn't an accident. They ran me off the road. I barely survived." I stared at her, disbelief turning to anger. Asterisk. "So you let me think you were dead." "I had to. If they knew I was alive, they'd come for me again and anyone near me." I paced the room, trying to make sense of it all. "You sent those letters to warn me." She nodded. "At first, yes. But now? It's too late to just warn. They're coming for your land again. And this time, they have federal connections. Political backing." Marcus, who had been quietly recording everything on his phone, finally spoke. "So what do they want now?" "Another fake development." Linda hesitated. "No, something bigger. A private corporate city, self-governed, tax-exempt. They call it the Renewal Project. Your land is at the center of it." I felt the blood drain from my face. "A private city, built over my ranch." Marcus muttered. "That's not development. That's takeover." Linda nodded weakly. "And they've already started the paperwork. That's why they wanted me gone." She looked at me, tears filling her eyes. "Gray, I didn't mean for any of this. I just wanted to build something beautiful. But they used me, and now they're using you." For a long time, none of us spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the sea and the creak of the boards beneath us. Finally, said, "Then let's use them back." Linda blinked. "What do you mean?" "They play dirty through the system." "Fine. Then I'll beat them with the system. Legally." Marcus smirked. "You're planning something, aren't you?" "Oh, I'm planning more than that," I said. "If they want my land, they'll have to buy it, and I'll sell it to them. Every inch of it." Linda frowned. "Gray, that's what they want," I interrupted. "No, Linda. not the land they think I own. I'm going to sell their land instead. She stared at me, confused. What do you mean? I smiled faintly. They stole 2,000 acres through fraudulent deeds. But legally, those transfers were never ratified by a verified county registrar, which means every single house they built still sits on contested ground. I can file a lien on each one. Marcus's eyes widened. Wait, you're saying exactly, I said. I'm going to legally sell their houses the same way they illegally sold my land. Linda whispered, that's insane. Maybe, I said, but it's justice. We spent the next week preparing. Marcus handled the legal paperwork, liens, ownership disputes, public notices. Linda provided internal documents proving Ryder's forgery trail. And me? I began contacting buyers. Not big corporations, locals, families, veterans. People who'd been priced out of the very homes. Ryder stole. Each of them received a legitimate purchase contract backed by historical ownership and newly reinstated deeds. By the time Ryder's lawyers noticed, it was too late. Over half the HOA's old houses were already under pending sale, all signed in my name, backed by verified county records. They called it fraud. But when the case hit court, the judge ruled otherwise. Because I had the original survey rights, the oldest title in the county, predating Ryder's incorporation. Legally speaking, I owned their entire subdivision. Marcus grinned as he handed me the verdict. You actually did it, he said. Linda sat quietly in the corner, her eyes wet. You really sold their houses? She asked. I nodded. Every single one. To people who deserved them more. She smiled sadly. Then maybe there's still good left in Silver Pines after all. I looked out the window at the sunrise, breaking over the water. The war wasn't over yet, but for the first time in years, I felt like I'd finally taken something back. Asterisk, asterisk, after the court ruling, Silver Pines was in chaos. Half the homeowners didn't even know their properties were technically sitting on land that wasn't theirs anymore. The news spread like wildfire. Local reporters called it the Great HOA Turnaround. Social media lit up with memes. Man sells HOA's own houses. But while the public laughed, Ryder Development didn't, and I knew they wouldn't go down quietly. It started with the letters. Cease and desist, counterclaim filed. Defamation notice. Every day, Marcus's office phone rang non-stop. Then came the visit. 2 men in black suits, polished shoes, tinted car. They parked outside my ranch one morning like they owned the road. The taller one stepped out, flashing a thin smile. Mr. Gray, I presume? I didn't answer. He handed me a thick envelope. From Ryder's legal division, he said smoothly. You've created quite a stir. They'd like to discuss settlement options. I opened the envelope. Inside was a check. $5 million and a clause. I'd have to transfer full ownership of all disputed land and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I stared at it for a long second, then tore it in half right in front of him. Tell your bosses, I said, if they want my land, they can bid for it at public auction like everyone else. He didn't blink. But as he turned to leave, he said softly, You're making powerful enemies. Mr. Gray, some of them don't play by courtroom rules. That night, I barely slept. Security cameras flickered again. One of my barns mysteriously caught fire, no one inside. But the damage was clear. They were sending a message. But they underestimated one thing. I wasn't the same man they stole from years ago. I'd learned their game, their greed, their arrogance, and now? I had allies. Linda and Marcus helped me draft a counterattack, not in the shadows. But in broad daylight, we went public. Marcus leaked the internal memos Linda had saved, proof of forged signatures. Fake board elections and shell companies laundering money through the HOA. The story hit national media in days. Developers exposed in massive HOA fraud ring. Talk shows, podcasts, even the local news, they all wanted interviews. I didn't care for fame. I just wanted justice. But what happened next went beyond anything I imagined. A state senator called me personally. He said the governor's office had opened an investigation. Federal agents wanted to review Ryder Development's finances. Within weeks, the company's stock plummeted. Their lawyers vanished. Their CEO resigned for personal reasons. Silver Pines Holdings, LC, the shadow company that started it all, dissolved overnight. I watched it unfold like dominoes falling in perfect order. Marcus leaned back in his chair, grinning. You just sank a multi-million-dollar corporation using their own playbook. I smiled faintly. I didn't sink them. I just let them drown in the truth. But just as things seemed to settle, Linda disappeared again. Her phone went dark. Her house empty. All that remained was a single envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a short note. They found me. Don't come looking. Finish what we started. There was no signature. Just a small photo attached to a blurry image of a dockyard, with a Ryder Development logo half-burned on a crate in the background. Marcus examined it. Looks like one of their offshore logistics sites, he said. They're moving evidence, probably trying to cover up the money trail. I clenched my fists. Then, that's where we end this. We drove to the docks 2 nights later. The place was half abandoned, rows of shipping containers, flickering floodlights, seagulls circling over the black water. We found a group of men loading boxes onto a freighter. Marcus whispered, "That's Ryder's private transport. They're smuggling their hard drives and files out of the country." I stepped out from the shadows. Not tonight. They froze. One of them reached for a weapon, but before he could, sirens wailed in the distance. State troopers rolled in. Marcus had called them before we arrived. The entire operation went down in minutes. Boxes of documents, hard drives, financial ledgers, all seized. And among the evidence, the agents found something unexpected. A passport. Fake name, but the photo was unmistakable Linda Patterson. I didn't know what to think. Was she working with them again? Or had they taken her for good this time? Either way, the case was out of my hands now. The government had what they needed, proof that Ryder had committed years of organized fraud and property theft. My land was finally safe. But my peace. WASN single quotes. Because no matter how many battles I'd won, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That somewhere, out there, Linda was still watching, still running, and maybe, just maybe, still trying to make things right. A few days later, Marcus walked into my office holding a sealed letter. "No return address," he said. I opened it carefully. Inside, a single sentence. "You were right. Gray, justice isn't about revenge. It's about making them feel what they made us feel." And taped to the bottom was a check signed by Wim Steek. By Linda made out to the Silver Pines Restoration Fund. Amount: $1 million. I looked out over the hills. My land glowing gold under the sunset. The homes I'd sold were filled again, children playing. Laughter echoing where greed once ruled. Silver Pines was finally alive, and this time it belonged to the people, not the powerful. But somewhere deep down, I knew there were still questions unanswered. How had Linda gotten that money? Was she still tied to Ryder's remnants? I didn't know. And maybe I didn't need to, because as far as I was concerned, I'd taken back my legacy. And no HOA, no corporation, no shadow company could ever steal that again. Asterisk. It had been 6 months since Ryder Development crumbled. 6 months since the court officially restored my ownership of every acre they'd stolen. And yet, even with everything settled on paper, peace still felt like a stranger. You'd think victory would taste sweet. But all I could taste was the smoke from the barns they burned, the lies they told, and the friends I lost in the process. Linda was gone again. Marcus had gone back to his firm, and Silver Pines. My land was finally quiet. But quiet doesn't always mean safe. One evening, I got a call from the county assessor's office. A young clerk, nervous voice. "Mr. Gray, sir, there's something strange with your land records. We've had irregular activity." Define irregular? Well, someone's been accessing your property files remotely, updating ownership notes, tax rolls, and zoning statuses. But the system shows your credentials. My credentials. I asked, stunned. "That's impossible." He hesitated. We double-checked. "It's your signature key. Either someone cloned your identity, or someone inside the county's helping them." I thanked him and hung up, my chest tightening. After everything, someone was still trying to rewrite my land out from under me. I called Marcus right away. He sighed when he heard it. "It's not over, is it?" "Not yet," I said. "We need to trace those edits. Whoever's behind them still has access to the system." We dug for days through databases, cloud servers, IP traces. Finally, Marcus found a location, an encrypted login coming from a corporate node in Dallas, Texas. The domain name froze me. Baldrick Management, the same offshore company that had started it all. "How is that possible?" I muttered. "They were dissolved." Marcus shrugged. "Legally, sure. But companies like that don't die, they shed their skin. Someone's still running their back-end accounts." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What if this isn't just about the land anymore? What if they're covering a bigger trail, something Ryder left unfinished?" I thought about Linda, about her disappearance, and the $1 million check she somehow sent me after she vanished. What if she's part of it? I whispered. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. 2 nights later, my ranch office security alarm went off. The cameras caught nothing but static. By the time I got there, the door was half open. Inside, my computer was still running. On the screen, an open email draft addressed to me. Subject line: "The final audit." There was no body text. Just one attached file. silverpines_audit_confidential.pdf. Marcus examined it the next morning. "This file's been tampered with," he said. "Someone wanted you to find it, but not understand it." We decrypted it manually, line by line. Inside was a spreadsheet, hundreds of transactions stretching back years. Ryder Baldrick fake shell accounts. Money moving from one to another, looping back through government grants, property subsidies, even charity fronts, and near the bottom, a familiar name: Linda Patterson. Marcus scrolled down. "She's listed as a disbursement officer. Looks like she got a payout 3 weeks ago from a Ryder subsidiary that shouldn't exist. The amount? Exactly $1 million, the same figure she sent to my restoration fund." I sat back, stunned. "She used dirty money to make things right," I muttered. Marcus gave me a long look. "Or she used you to launder it clean." I didn't want to believe that. Linda had made mistakes, sure, but I'd seen her remorse. Her fear. She risked everything to expose Ryder. But what if she hadn't disappeared out of fear? What if she disappeared because she finished the job? A week later, a package arrived at my ranch. No name, no return address, just my initials carved into the wax seal. Inside was a hard drive, and a single note: "For when you're ready to know everything." I plugged it in. The files were encrypted. But one folder was open: Silver Pines Legacy. Inside were hundreds of documents, land deeds, old contracts, photographs, and a single video file. I clicked play. Linda appeared on screen, sitting in a dimly lit room, looking tired but calm. "If you're seeing this, Gray, then it's over," at least for me. You were right. Ryder wasn't just after the land. They were building an empire, one deed at a time, one shell company after another. I played my part, willingly or not. But I've made it right in the only way I could. She paused, voice trembling. I funneled their remaining assets into the state's restitution fund. Every cent will go to the families they hurt, including you. But if you keep digging, you'll find names that go higher than we ever imagined. She looked off camera, then back at me. Be careful, Gray. Some truths aren't meant to be owned. The screen went black. I sat there in silence for a long time. Marcus finally said, "Do you want me to forward this to the feds?" I shook my head slowly. No. If she risked her life to end this, I'm not going to reopen it. He nodded. So what now? I looked out the window, where the rebuilt barn stood and the field swayed in the wind. Now, I said quietly, we build something honest, something no one can steal again. A few months later, I launched the Silver Pines Cooperative. Not an HOA, not a corporation. A community-owned trust. Every resident held equal ownership of their property and the shared land. No board, no hidden investors, no loopholes. It became the first of its kind in the state, and soon other towns started calling, asking how they could do the same. Marcus helped write the legal framework. And on opening day, when the mayor cut the ribbon, I looked around at the smiling families and thought, this is what it was supposed to be all along. That night, as the celebration wound down, I stood by the fence line under a full moon. The wind carried the sound of laughter from the houses below, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard a voice behind me. Soft, familiar. Nice work, Gray. I turned, but no one was there. Just the whisper of the fields, rustling in the night. Asterisk, by the time my lawsuit reached the district court, the HOA was already cracking. Board members were resigning. Their lawyer, once so smug, was now fumbling through paperwork, trying to explain missing funds and illegal deeds. But for me, it wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about justice, and making sure no one could ever do what they did to my father's land again. My attorney, Grace, was brilliant. She presented every fraudulent document, every sale, every forged signature. She showed how the HOA sold parcels of my land to private investors without my consent, then pocketed the profits under community improvement fees. Remember the silence in that courtroom when she displayed the aerial maps, the same ones I used years I go to survey cattle routes with my father. These 2,000 acres, she said, her voice calm but firm, belong entirely to Mr. Sawyer. The HOA had no ownership, no authority, and no right to sell or transfer them. The HOA president, Frank Dalton, tried to interrupt, claiming they acted in the community's best interest. But the judge leaned forward, his expression icy. Mr. Dalton, he said, you don't sell what isn't yours for anyone's best interest. The moment was electric, but I wasn't done. Grace introduced the final piece, the clause I'd placed in my lawsuit that turned every one of their illegal actions back on them, through a legal mechanism called constructive trust. Any property purchased or financed using my land's proceeds would revert to me. Essentially, since their homes were built or funded using profits from my stolen acres, those properties now became legally entangled with my ownership claim. It was poetic. Justice delivered through the very system they had used against me. The HOA's lawyer objected, shouting, "That's impossible." But Grace smiled. "It's not impossible. It's law." The judge took days to review everything. Each hour that passed, I could feel the town talking, rumors spreading, alliances shifting. Some homeowners, once proud supporters of the HOA, now cursed them for dragging everyone into chaos. And then, finally, the judgment came. The HOA's deeds were invalid. Their sales were reversed. And due to fraud, every property tied to the illegal transactions fell under temporary receivership awaiting. Reassignment of ownership, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Some cried. Some stormed out. Frank Dalton just sat there, pale as a ghost. As the judge read the final order, pending restitution, the claimant, Mr. Sawyer, may petition for full ownership or liquidation of involved assets to satisfy damages. That meant I had the legal right to take control of the very homes they had built on stolen land. I walked out of that courtroom, not angry, not smug, just quiet. For years, they had stolen from me in the shadows. Now the light had finally caught up to them. Outside, a crowd of reporters waited. Cameras flashed. A journalist shouted, "Mr. Sawyer, what will you do with the HOA properties now that you legally own them?" I paused, looked back toward the courthouse, and simply said, "I'll do what they never did what's fair." But in truth, I already had a plan. See, I didn't want to destroy the neighborhood. I wanted to rebuild it without corruption, without greed. But I also wasn't going to let the guilty walk away unscathed, so I called a meeting, an open one. Every homeowner was invited to HOA board or not. They filled the town hall that night. Some looked angry, others defeated. I stood on that same podium where, years ago, they dismissed me as a bitter landowner. "I know many of you didn't know what your board was doing," I began. "And I know you love your homes. But those homes were built on my land, on my father's land. I won't take away what you've worked for, but I will take back what's rightfully ours." There was a murmur in the crowd. Asterisk. "I'm offering a deal," I continued. "Every homeowner who can show proof they bought their property in good faith will be allowed to repurchase their title, directly from me legally, cleanly. And for far less than the HOA ever charged you." You could feel the tension in the air loosen slightly. But for the board members who orchestrated this theft, their properties will be sold. Publicly, the proceeds will go toward restitution and rebuilding this community. Frank Dalton wasn't in that room anymore. He'd resigned and vanished after the verdict. But his allies were there, sweating under the lights, faces twisted in shame. After the meeting, people approached me, some crying, some shaking my hand, some apologizing. For years, I'd been that guy who hated the HOA. Now I was the one who saved them from it. The following weeks were chaos. Lawyers, appraisers, state officials, everyone scrambling to untangle the mess. But through it all, I stayed calm. I knew what needed to be done. Within 2 months, I had full legal control of the properties tied to the HOA's fraud. And when the dust settled, I made my move, instead of keeping the homes. I auctioned off the corrupt board members' properties to pay back the legal costs, the stolen profits, and fund a new foundation for honest land ownership. And as for the land, the 2,000 acres they had once stolen from didn't sell it. I turned it into something better. A conservation trust, protected under my family's name, untouchable by developers, HOAs, or greedy hands. The same land my father taught me to ride on, to work on, to respect would now stand forever. Untouched, I thought that was the end, but I was wrong. Because when word got out that I had successfully turned an HOA's illegal actions into a legal reversal that cost them their homes, other communities began reaching out. Letters, emails, messages from all over the country, people asking for help, advice, guidance on how to fight back against corrupt boards. Unfair fines, illegal land seizures. At first, I ignored them. I was tired. But then one letter caught my eye from an elderly couple in Arizona, who said their HOA was trying to evict them from the land they'd lived on for 40 years. Their story sounded all too familiar. I sat down at my desk, looking over the papers. My land was safe now, my family's name cleared, my enemies defeated. But maybe this fight wasn't just about me anymore. Maybe it was about standing up for every person who'd ever been bullied by the system they trusted. And that's when I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something bigger. Asterisk, asterisk, just when I thought the battle was over. A new storm appeared, quiet at first, subtle, almost invisible. It started with a phone call from a financial investigator I'd hired to audit the auctions. "Gray," he said. Voice tense, "You might want to sit down. There's something in the books. Something we missed." I braced myself. "Go on." "It's Frank Dalton," he continued. "He didn't vanish. He's been working behind the scenes. And he's smart. He set up a secret trust fund using shell corporations, moving money overseas. Some of the properties you auctioned off. He's already reclaiming them in stealthy ways." I felt my stomach drop. After everything, I thought I had removed his grip completely. Marcus leaned back in his chair, frowning. "So he's trying to undo us quietly." I nodded. "Exactly. But this time, I won't let him get away with it." I called in my team, Marcus, Linda's files we still had, and Grace, my attorney. We began tracing every transfer, every offshore account, every corporate veil Dalton had used. It was like untangling a spiderweb. But we found patterns. Certain shell companies kept popping up registered under fake names but linked to him. And the strangest part? Some of the funds were linked to old HOA accounts, diverted profits that he'd thought were safe. I realized then that Dalton had planned for years. He wasn't just greedy, he was meticulous. We set a trap. I issued public notices for a community reinvestment project in Silver Pines, illegal. County-approved plan inviting bids from anyone wishing to invest in infrastructure and land improvements. Every shell company linked to Dalton attempted to bid. They didn't realize I had already flagged them. Legally, as conflicted parties, and any participation would trigger an automatic audit and potential criminal charges. They walked right into it. The moment of revelation came when Dalton himself appeared. At a public bidding session, confident, smug, I greeted him calmly. "Frank," I said, voice steady. "I see you're trying to make a comeback," he sneered. "Gray, you think you've won? I've got layers they haven't even uncovered yet. You can't touch me." I smiled. "Actually, I already have." I handed the judge the audit report. Each transfer, each hidden trust, each shell corporation, documented, verified, and linked back to him. The judge reviewed it silently. Then he looked at Dalton. "Mr. Dalton," he said, "you are hereby ordered to cease all transactions and surrender all assets associated with Silver Pines-related entities. Any attempt to circumvent this order will be met with contempt and federal prosecution." Dalton's face went pale. He tried to argue, tried to protest, but every legal avenue had been preempted. After the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse and breathed in the crisp evening air. I had reclaimed everything: my land, the community's homes, and even neutralized Dalton's final scheme. But something else lingered, something I hadn't expected. Linda, I hadn't heard from her in months. And the last thing I knew, she was gone, perhaps forever. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived at my ranch. It was small, hand-delivered, with no return address. Inside was a single line: "Gray, you did what I couldn't. Keep Silver Pines safe. LP." And underneath, a photograph. Not of her face, but of a young girl playing in the fields of Silver Pines, the same land she had once tried to help me protect. I realized then that Linda had been more than a warning. More than an Alicia, had been a guardian from the start. Silver Pines was finally free from the shadows of greed and corruption. The community thrived. Families returned. The land flourished. and for me. I had learned a lesson about justice, patience, and the true meaning of ownership. Sometimes victory isn't measured in revenge. It's measured in what you protect, what you rebuild, and the legacy you leave behind. But as I watched the sunset over my restored land, I couldn't help but wonder, even with Dalton defeated and Ryder gone, were there others out there, silent predators, waiting for a moment of weakness? I didn't have the answer, but one thing was certain: I'd never let anyone take my land or my life's work again. Months passed, and Silver Pines finally began to feel like home again, not just for me, but for everyone who had been caught in the HOA's chaos. The cooperative system I implemented worked seamlessly. Families had legal ownership of their homes. The land was protected. The community voted on every decision transparently and fairly. No hidden fees, no backroom deals. Just honesty. I walked through the fields one morning, sunlight streaming through the trees, and saw children running across the open land, laughing. Horses grazed peacefully, and the small lake glimmered like a jewel. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Yet even in this moment of triumph, the memories lingered. I thought of my father, of the land he had trusted me to protect, of Ryder Development and the HOA, whose greed had turned my life upside down, of Frank Dalton, whose schemes had nearly cost me everything, and of Linda Patterson, who had vanished, leaving behind only fragments of herself and a legacy of protection. I knew one thing: this land had survived, not because of me alone, but because I fought not just for revenge, but for justice. I held a small ceremony to commemorate the restoration of Silver Pines. Neighbors, friends, and new residents gathered. We planted trees along the fence lines, rebuilt the community center, and inaugurated a trust fund for any future land protection initiatives. As I addressed the crowd, I felt a mix of humility and resolve. Silver Pines is no longer just my family's land, I said. It belongs to everyone who calls it home. We've rebuilt something stronger than before, stronger than greed, corruption, or betrayal, and we will protect it together. The crowd applauded. Some cried. I caught a glimpse of Marcus, smiling quietly, proud. Later that evening, alone on the porch overlooking the lake, I thought about Linda one last time. She had risked everything to help me reclaim this land. I would never know why she disappeared so completely or where she was now. But I knew her work had made all the difference. Somewhere, somehow, she had helped secure Silver Pines, not for herself, but for everyone who lived here. I realized then that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration, and in that moment, I knew my family's land and our legacy was safe. Silver Pines had survived greed, betrayal, and corruption, and now it would survive for generations. No HOA could ever control it again. No corrupt developer could take it. And no one could steal what we had rebuilt with truth, patience, and resolve. As I turned inside, ready to finally rest, I glanced back at the horizon. The sun dipped below the hills, casting a golden glow over the lake and fields, and for the first time in decades, I smiled because I had taken back what was mine, protected what mattered, and ensured that Silver Pine's story would never be forgotten. The land was free, the homes were secure, and the legacy was ours. Thanks for watching.